First presidential debate is mere hours away. A new national poll released by the Pew Research Center shows the two candidates tied, each getting 49% of the vote. There's no question this will be a pivotal moment for the Harris campaign, as she shied away from media, only doing one sit-down interview with Dana Bash so far. Makes sense then why the latest New York Times poll found 28% of likely voters say they felt they needed to know more about Harris, while only 9% said the same about Trump. Harris is no doubt going to face questions about her past and present policies and will have to fend off attacks from Trump. Here to set the scene is the Hill's White House columnist, Niall Stanage. Thank you so much for joining us, Niall.
Good to be with you guys.
All right, what are you expecting to see tonight? You know, this is seen as a real opportunity for Kamala Harris to explain some of the rebranding that has taken place over the last several weeks as she ditches some of the progressive policies she was forced to co-sign in the 2019-2020 era. What do you think you'll see from her?
I think there's more at stake in a way for Vice President Harris than there is for former President Trump, partly because of the reason you mentioned in your introduction, Robbie. The fact is that there are more voters who are persuadable one way or another with Harris. With Trump, you know what you're going to get. A large number of people love that. A large number of people loathe that. There aren't really that many undecided voters. So with Harris, I think there is a real opportunity for her to make herself acceptable and to try to explain those changed positions. But there is very appreciable downside if she comes across as inauthentic or if she simply doesn't have a good enough explanation for those shifts in position.
Now, we saw her roll out a bit of her economic plan on the campaign trail. We've had the media talking about these capital gains taxes, and a lot of people have misunderstood them. If you do not make over $1 million, you probably shouldn't worry about this at all. Do you think we're going to hear her clarify her economic plans at all in the debate tonight?
I imagine she'll talk about her economic plans in broad strokes, Jessica. I'm just not so sure exactly how much detail she will offer. Things like the capital gains proposal is something that she could go into, but then you can quite easily get lost in the weeds, whereas I think she wants to make this broad thrust about an opportunity economy, as she calls it. So, I mean, she can get into this stuff. Maybe she can clarify or at least push back on some of the attacks made against her. But I don't necessarily expect a whole lot of really granular detail about her economic plans.
In the June debate, the disastrous debate that ended Joe Biden's attempt to win a second term, that was obviously mostly the focus. There was very little said on foreign policy in that entire debate, just a few seconds really spent on Israel, for instance, a major point of contention between progressives and Joe Biden, a major mystery for how, to what extent Trump would do things differently. And now same goes for Harris. Obviously, there was developments in the Israel-Hamas conflict, with Israel striking a humanitarian zone, killing dozens there. They said there was a Hamas target to be taken out. Is this going to come up at all? Now we have two candidates really who are somewhat of a question mark on the extent to which they'd be different from this current administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dispute or the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is obviously the central foreign policy issue, and it deserves more time than it got in that first debate. And there may well be more attention given to it this time around because of those tragic events that you mentioned, Robbie. I think it is a politically tricky issue for Harris. She has tried, to the extent possible, to navigate a kind of middle ground between the progressives and the more pro-Israel slant in her party. I think that's politically precarious for her. Trump is broadly very, very pro-Israel, and so is his party. So it's politically easier for him in a sense, even though he doesn't give that much detail. Just briefly on the global affairs point, I mean, it'll be interesting also to see whether Ukraine comes up at all, because that is a topic where the candidates have very, very different attitudes toward US aid to Ukraine and whether it should be maintained at its current cadence or not.
So we saw the first time around the rules change so that the mics are off when it's not the candidate's turn to speak. Kamala Harris's camp has decided to try to get ABC to change the rules. They don't seem to be forthcoming on this. Although it does seem that Donald Trump's mental state is more of a liability this time around, what do you make of that attempted rule change and how Donald Trump's mental acuity will affect tonight's debate?
So, as far as the rule change is concerned, Jessica, I think what that Harris proposal speaks to is her team's greater level of confidence that she can react spontaneously, counter Trump in the moment, and perhaps goad him into saying something imprudent or inflammatory. I don't think that the Biden team had that level of confidence at all in June, and obviously they were right not to have that level of confidence. As far as Trump's mental acuity is concerned, I mean, he is 78 years old. That is what, 23, sorry, almost 20 years older than Harris. So that has flipped the age question on its head to some extent. Whether you consider it mental acuity or just Trump's rather idiosyncratic way of communicating is another question. But there was that exchange last week where he was asked quite politely about his plans to make childcare more affordable. And the answer was very, very incoherent. So things like that are a potential danger for him.
You know, that poll we read shows that people have largely made up their mind about Trump, and I think most people in this country have made up their mind about the election by now, which raises the possibility that the debate won't have much of an impact, although it says crazy to say that after the last debate completely changed the course of history, potentially. So it's difficult to say that it won't have any effect, but at this stage, how can anyone in this country, I know they exist, people who just don't know what to do, maybe because of frustration, because some people like Trump's policies but are sick of Trump, or they like what Kamala Harris is saying now but didn't like what she was saying before, or the other way around. How can they speak to those voters?
With great difficulty, I think, is probably the answer, Robbie. I mean, as you pointed out in the question, if you're right now thinking, well, I'm not sure whether to vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, almost by definition, you're a bit of a political anomaly. Now, it may be that some of those people don't follow every twist and turn of politics and aren't of any particularly ideologically fixed position, which is fine, but I don't necessarily think they're then going to be watching or spending their Tuesday night watching a whole debate. I think there is always the suggestion in debates that there can be a viral moment that captures people and moves people who are not following politics obsessively. And that doesn't have to be anything as catastrophic as what happened to Biden in June. There have been other instances like that. Al Gore sighing at George W. Bush was a moment like that. A whole generation ago, the elder George Bush was looking at his watch during a debate with Bill Clinton, which was perceived as emblematic of a lack of concern for regular folks. Those kind of moments, I think, have a lifespan and a political significance that is greater than just, a discussion of policy.
Now, Donald Trump has made Kamala Harris's identity in many ways a huge part of his campaigning, calling her all kinds of names, lots of conversations about her race. Is she Black or not? Does she like Jewish people or not? Knowing that her husband Doug is Jewish. Do you expect this to come up at all tonight from Donald Trump? And how do you expect Kamala to respond?
So I speak to Republicans who are hoping it doesn't come up because, Jessica, they believe that those kind of comments are very counterproductive for Trump. Yes, there's an element of his base that is receptive to that kind of language, but it doesn't build on his base any. And after all, his base was not enough to win the election last time around. So I think that those moments are a big vulnerability for him if he goes in that direction. You have a lot of Republican voices urging restraint, but Mr. Trump is not exactly synonymous with restraint. And certainly there's some suggestion that Kamala Harris and her team have been trying to get under his skin a little bit and might try to goad him on the debate stage itself.
Niall Stanage, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.